Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hello everybody, welcome to the podcast. This is episode 60 and I will talk about filters of violence. As always, we have to do the shout out, and shame on me because I forgot to do the shout out on the last episode, in which I interviewed Mike Janich, which was an awesome interview. Got a lot of positive feedback on that. So if you haven't listened to that one, go to wimsblog.com/59, so number 59, and you can listen to it there. But great interview, but because I pre-recorded it a few weeks ago, I totally spaced out and forgot that I had to edit in my shout out. So with that, I am going to correct this and I'm going to shout out Eric Shaver. Eric, dude, thank you for being my patron for such a long time. I actually know Eric well. He's a good friend of mine, and he became a patron a few years ago and has stuck with me ever since. So Eric, you're the man. We already knew that, but now everybody else knows it too. So thank you. And everybody else, go to wimsblog.com/donate, and there you can check out how you can support the show and all my other work. And again, anything you can do, I appreciate it. Failing that, it's perfectly fine if you just hit the like button, just squeeze the crap out of it, put a rear naked choke on the like button and squeeze until you like it as much as you can, and then you hit the share button with a good headbutt or a jump spinning back kick and share it just with everybody. And that helps out tremendously. I'm only half getting the liking and the sharing and leaving a review, all that stuff. That makes a huge difference. So if you could do that, I'd be eternally grateful. All right. Before I get to the filters of violence, I've been playing with some thoughts to do something else online, and one of the thoughts is something I want to do on the Minds platform. So if you don't know it, it's a social media platform basically. Very different from the Facebooks and the YouTubes of the world. If you go to minds.com/Wim Demeere, my name. And again, I'll put a link in the show notes, and those will be, surprise, surprise, at wimsblog.com/60. Hit me up there, become linked with me there, and that's where I will be pretty soon. Depends on how quickly I can finish certain things. We'll leave some commentary and some videos that will be pretty much exclusive to Minds. Why? Well, for several reasons. I like the platform a lot. Technologically speaking, I think it has some really interesting features. It also runs on the blockchain, so I'm a big fan of that as well. Again, I'm not going to get too technical because I may be a nerd, but most of you probably aren't. But it's just the technological aspect of it really appeals to me. So I am going to do that there, and it will be something along the lines of the violence analysis videos that I already do on Patreon, but a little bit different. And it's probably going to be exclusive on Minds. And again, this has to do with the way Minds works. So, head on over, minds.com/Wim Demeere, and we'll see what happens there. So that is the big announcement. Well, it's not really that big. It's just me sharing a plan I have. And it'll be fun. That's the main thing. I want to enjoy the stuff I do online, especially after last year, which was kind of a crappy year. And just so you guys know, here in Belgium, we are in lockdown again for the third time. So I've decided that, having fun is an important part of life. And the more my government limits my ability to have fun, the more I will create my own fun. And for the most part, for me, that means doing stuff that I enjoy. And I really like those violence analysis videos that I do on Patreon. And this kind of fits in with today's topic. And let's move on to that. Filters of violence. So what is that all about? Well, I'll wrap it up in a nice conclusion at the end of the episode, so you'll see my point. but I have to give a little bit of an explanation first. So where does it come from? Well, on my Facebook page, there I often post commentary and analysis of violent encounters that are caught on video or pictures or something like that. Now, this is not unlike violence analysis videos that I do on Patreon, but those are a lot more in-depth. So with those, I use my feedback software that I have. It's coaching software that allows me to zoom in and out of the video, draw on it with arrows and a lot of other stuff. I can fast forward, I can slide it back frame by frame and so on. So it's very powerful software. And in those videos, I try to go in depth. Now, with what I post on social media, it's a little bit different. It's usually, what I want to do is give information using examples. Real life examples. I think those are some of the most powerful lessons that we can learn if you can see in front of your eyes, this is how it happens in real life. And then I try to give takeaways and lessons that hopefully help you to keep yourself and your loved ones safe. And this is an example that I learned way back in high school when I studied Latin. And the teacher said that there's a method that you can use, and I've tried to use that in all of my teaching, is that, for instance, some of the grammar in Latin, when you get to the advanced grammar, it's pretty complex. It's not as easy. So he said that there's a method in which that you will remember a sentence in which that grammatical rule is very clearly demonstrated. And if you remember the sentence, it's easier to remember the rule or the definition. I also encountered that when I started reading Bob Orlando's work and watching his videos, and then later on becoming his student, because that is something that he used a lot as well. And he often would say that, look, okay, this technique may not be the best technique ever against whatever attack it was. Somebody grabs you by the throat or punches you, whatever. He says, may not be the best technique ever, but it illustrates the principle very well. And as you know, if you've followed Bob, he was very much into principles and trying to explain how they apply and then teaching them to people so that you can then incorporate them into your own training. So using examples, I think, is always a powerful method of teaching or learning. Now, we live in a day and age, as I've said often, in which you should just pretty much assume that anytime you leave your house, and even inside the house, maybe depending on who lives with you, but as soon as you step out of your front door, assume that you're being filmed. There are so many CCTV systems, there are so many cameras all over the place, security cameras, and more often than not, when something happens, people's first instincts are to whip out their phone and start filming. So assume that you're being filmed. That's a safe bet. Now that also means that, the last years we've had this huge deluge of tons of videos in which we see people fighting or violent situations happen in a wide variety of contexts all over the world. And those are great examples that you can learn from. Now, when I analyze these, the analysis is never complete. Not even in my violence analysis videos on Patreon, because you can't cover every single detail without writing an encyclopedia or making a 10-hour documentary each time. So that doesn't work. Instead, what I try to do is to focus on what I personally find stands out in each individual case. Now, the reason why I made this podcast episode is because the comments on my social media on these commentaries that I give and the analysis that I make, the comments usually cover a wide variety of opinions and many different points of view. Now, I find that interesting because when you see how people respond to it, well, sometimes somebody will point something out that I overlooked, or they will bring up new information from their own experience, and I get to learn, which is the whole point, I think, is, again, the social part of social media, is the interaction. That's the whole point. The issues, however, they start when there are discussions in the comments that become counterproductive. And sometimes I dive into the comments and will engage with somebody. More often than not, I don't. But the real issue that I see is that when people cannot see beyond their own filters, and that is problematic. Because if you want to understand violence better, and the point then is to keep yourself safe with that, improved understanding, well, start by understanding your own filters and learn to switch from one to the other so that you can learn something. And that is the way that I think you can avoid getting tunnel vision. And tunnel vision will cause that you won't see important aspects that could be very harmful to you if you are ever in a similar situation. So getting out of that tunnel vision and out of your own filters is, I think, a very critical skill and an important skill to master when it comes to self-defense and violence in general. Now, that idea of filters, that's just developing different ways of looking at the same thing to avoid missing those relevant factors, however many there are. And I use the word filters, could have used something else, but because the way I describe it often when I'm teaching classes and workshops is that you're putting a picture on Instagram, right? Go through every single filter Instagram offers. What do you see? You see the exact same picture, but different parts of it are either highlighted or obscured. And that is the point. So if you learn how to look at violent encounters using different filters, a specific filter will very much highlight some points that actually may be the main reasons why whatever happens. But at the same time, each filter will obscure other aspects. And sometimes that is detrimental. Sometimes you really miss the important part. And I'll give an example. There was, I'd have to look it up because I didn't find it right away as I was preparing for this episode. But I once wrote a blog post about multiple attackers. And I think the video is gone. That's why I couldn't find it. But there was a video online in which a bunch of people were fighting. And it was chaotic. And it was difficult to keep track of everything. But at a certain point, this one guy narrowly escapes being stabbed in the back because somebody pulled a knife. And it was hard to see. Now, one of my filters when I look at situations in which there are multiple opponents is that I will track each individual on the screen from beginning to end of the video separately. So if there's 5 people, I will watch 5 times looking at each individual person. What did they do at which point? As opposed to just seeing the overall total picture of all 5 people moving around at the same time. If you start tracking one particular guy, then it's easy to see, okay, what is he actually doing? And then when you combine all that information, you put the pieces of the puzzle together and you can see, all right, this is the dynamic of that situation. This is what they're doing individually. And this is what all 5 guys end up influencing each other. And it's the same thing with the filters. You can look at them at just categories of, or points of view, if you will. Now, these are just the ones that I use. They're not the be all and all. They're just what I use to look at incidents so I can analyze them better. Another aspect is they overlap. Now, I'm going to list the filters that I think are useful, but understand that when people comment or when they talk about a violent encounter, they very often mix them together. And that is subconscious. It's not something that they necessarily do on purpose. Sometimes it is, but more often than not, it's just that all filters are blended together or several ones are blended together and people just don't realize it. The real reason why I think it's important, and again, I'll come back to that at the end of the episode, is that it's very difficult to discuss something with somebody who is looking at it from one filter while they don't see that you're looking at it from a different filter. It's very, very difficult to get a productive conversation going. Usually it ends up in a shouting match, especially online. So I'll give you the filters that I use. So let's start with that. So the first one is the emotional. I placed a picture on my Facebook page, and the link is in the show notes. And it's of a woman flipping the bird at a police officer. Now, it was long story short. It was about the meme in the picture was basically like, maybe it's the citizens that need to be trained better. And my opinion was like, well, both. We need well-trained police officers, and we need well-trained citizens who understand what both their rights and duties are. And I'm going to call out names here in this episode, not necessarily to put people on blast. That's not my intent at all. It's just that this was done in public, so it's not that I'm telling any secrets. It's just that it's the people who commented publicly. So okay, that's it then. So Nasser said on that picture, I think it's wrong because the people don't have the training that the police have, ! They are our public servants and should be able to restrain themselves as such. And I disagree with that in the sense that, well, of course, but my whole point is that is one end of the equation. We're not just police officers, and then we can look at them, whatever they do, and then ignore whatever the citizens do in their interactions. It's as if like, well, that doesn't matter. We only look at what the police does. I very distinctly got the impression that he had some very strong emotional responses to police officers and law enforcement. That became very apparent in the discussion. Because I started talking about, well, you have rights and duties as a citizen. And he was very clearly uninformed. And as a result, because he was uninformed about that, eventually he was also unable to see my point. Now, my point is that law enforcement officers are citizens too. So if you, as a citizen, demand to be treated with respect and politeness, well, then I don't think you have the moral high ground when you don't reciprocate towards them. So either we're all worthy of respect and courtesy, or none of us are. You can't claim to deserve the respect from others for yourself when you refuse to give it to others. So that is, in my opinion, a purely emotional response. And I've seen a lot of people hate on law enforcement, especially this last year. It's gotten really bad. I'm like, it's you can criticize law enforcement when they make mistakes and get things wrong, just like any profession. If the baker doesn't make the right birthday cake for my child, well, I'll be upset and I'll talk to them about that. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to protest in front of his bakery and start causing trouble. Nor will I hate the guy for it. I'll just say like, dude, you messed up. And this has happened before, that I came home with a birthday cake and they spelled the name of my son wrong. So, okay. Well, you can get upset about that and start getting angry, but that doesn't mean that the baker deserves to be shouted at, in my opinion, because I wouldn't appreciate anybody shouting at me while I'm doing my job. Same thing applies to police officers. So this emotional response is what I see often, is that people just purely out of emotion, and very often outrage. People are outraged and offended about many things. I'm blanking on the British actor's name. I really can't remember, but he basically said that, okay, so you're outraged. So what doesn't mean anything? Doesn't mean you're right. I mean, my 3-year-old niece will get outraged if I take away the knife that she's been playing with, but it doesn't mean she's right when she wants it back, because she's going to end up injuring herself or stabbing herself in the eye and losing her eyesight. So I'm very much in the right when I take that knife away from her, but she's going to be really upset and angry with me and outraged and offended that I took away her toy. So this whole embracing of outrage culture is something that I think is very, very much a problem. And it's very difficult to talk to people when they only reason from emotion. So that filter in many ways for me is the least interesting one. I wouldn't say it's useless, but it's very easy to react emotionally to anything. What differentiates adults from children is that as an adult, you're supposed to get over that and then look more rationally at things. And another example of this is that I posted, again, the link is in the show notes. There was this incident where a football player and a friend started fighting with a wrestler, MMA fighter, and I think his brother or his friend. And that incident was caught on video. And the football player and his buddy got beat up pretty bad. And then Alejandro said, now these punks will know that it's time to back off when they see cauliflower ear. 3 exclamation points. And I'm like, okay. Well, yeah, that's an emotional response. It's not wrong when you see a guy with a cauliflower ear. Maybe you have to think twice about tangling with him, at the very least, grappling or clinching with him. But that's about it. Colin said on the same incident, Spencer Jones started this, then him and his buddy got his ass beat, and now they want to act like they are the victim. What a big pussy move. If that's not an emotional response, I don't know what it is. And again, this isn't wrong per se. It's just that you react out of emotion, but that doesn't advance the situation, the learning. We don't learn anything from that. Only that, calling somebody a pussy, okay. Well, that, now we know what you feel about him, how you feel about him. Okay, that's it. So the emotional response and filter is very much limited in my opinion. The scope is very limited. The next one is technical, and this is the one where I often spend a lot of time when I analyze situations. I'll look at how did it go about, which techniques are used, how can you make those techniques work for you, how should you approach this, and so on. So I'll give an example, and on the same video of the football player and the other guys, David said, too bad, neutralize the threat. You show mercy, guy gets up, and it could have been a bad day for the other guy. Trained fighters have a switch, when it's on, you're done. Well, on a technical level, he's not wrong. It's that, trained fighters do tend to have a switch, and when they switch on, they will go violent. And that was very clearly demonstrated in the video, that as soon as that wrestler / MMA guy decided to fight, it was on for sure. He threw punches, and then they went to the ground, and he tried to go for some sort of choke. Then he went into the mount position, did some ground and pound, and so on. So as a technical point, that is definitely something that is worth looking at. Like, okay, when you're in a fight, well, technically speaking, what often happens is that somebody will throw a punch, and if it lands, he gets to throw another punch because the guy is still reeling from that first one, and the second one hits, and that makes him a little bit groggy, a little bit extra groggy, and the third punch hit, and eventually that guy who gets punched doesn't have the capacity to fight back anymore. And the guy who threw the first punch wins. So on a technical level, this is something that is worth discussing. Now imagine that you are looking at that fight purely from an emotional response. That is a filter. You're outraged, like, how dare he, and this and that. And then I start talking about the technical aspects. Well, he threw a right hand and it landed, and then, he pushed him, and then he threw another punch. The guy leaned over, then on the ground, he did a rear naked choke, but you could see he didn't get a good angle. So he transitioned into the mount and he started striking him. But, maybe it wasn't the best idea because he was hitting the back of the skull. So he's going to damage his fist. So that's all purely technical and relatively emotionally neutral. If I don't correspond with emotions towards you, as you are still in your outrage filter, well, then you're going to, what the hell are you talking about? And that guy's an asshole. Oh, okay. I'm not saying he's not. It's just that I'm talking about something else. So the technical aspect is very often where I focus and what I think is something you can learn from. Technical aspect has many different categories as well. You can just look purely at the physical part. How do you move your body? What are the body mechanics involved? You can just be like the details. Okay, where do you put your elbow? A little bit lower, a little bit higher, and so on. So there's many different aspects to that as well, and that is what many people are also looking for when they learn self-defense techniques. Like, okay, how do you do that? And it's purely technical. I'll move on to the next one, and that is the personal one. And I found that one very often worthwhile when people comment from that, because they compare what they see in the video I post with something that they experienced. And then we can get to interesting discussions, because then it's like, well, I had something similar, but it's very different. Or this is what happened to me, and this is what I did, and that was the result. And then we're like, okay, we are collecting data, and we can look at it from that point of view. Now, a little bit different, but still, the personal experience angle in this filter is relevant. I posted a video of a suicide attempt on a roof, and police officers just intervened, and they managed to grab the guy who's sitting on the ledge, pull him back in, and save his life. And one of my points is that imagine being that officer. You're trying to very slowly get close enough to grab that guy sitting there while your partner distracts him. You hope that you don't make a noise. You hope that you don't make the wrong sudden move. You hope that when you do grab him that you're fast enough. You hope that if you're not fast enough and you don't get a perfect grip, that you're strong enough to hold on and pull him back in. So all that goes through your head. And if you fail, you get to see the consequences of your failure, because they will be splattered all over the sidewalk. So imagine being that and living with that. And Steve responded to that. Steve, he's also a law enforcement officer, and he said, "I have memories that will not leave me." We all do. And I think that is a very valuable point. And it points out that, look, what you're saying here is right from my own experience. He doesn't have to obviously share all the incidents that would probably not be psychologically healthy to dig too deep into that. But meaning, the point is that you can recognize the truth if you have experienced it yourself, and confirm it for other people who have not experienced that. We all have different experiences. They're all real to us. They're all true. Your experience may contradict mine, but it doesn't make it less true. So if we talk from experience, then it gets to be a more interesting discussion, because we can start looking at, well, why did the opposite happen to you than with what I experienced? So let's give another example. I posted another video. It was a traffic stop. Two officers stop a car, and the driver gets out of the car and draws his gun, and they end up shooting the guy, obviously. Now, again, Steve said, I know as soon as he started playing 20 questions, it was an interdiction stop. Notice he had his flashlight in his gun hand. Mistake 2 was, as he exited the vehicle, his right hand drifted behind him. That's not normal. Noticing that would have improved his reaction time. He's very, very lucky. Because I said that the officer was very lucky to survive that. And then we get Steve talking from his experience as a professional. Like, okay, this is what I think went wrong. And yes, he was indeed very lucky. Now, and that's, for me, very often the most interesting part when we get to comments, it's when the professionals talk, because they are doing that every single day. They have the training, they have the experience, and their points of view are usually focused on whatever the job is. And it doesn't matter what it is, if it's violence and we're talking about law enforcement, if it's violence and it's bouncers that you see in action, or anything else. It doesn't matter who it is. But if somebody who does that for a living talks from their own experience, then I find that is very much worthwhile spending time in that filter. Because like I said before, memories are individual and true. Experiences, sorry, I shouldn't have said memories. So experiences are individual and true. Your experience in your life is true. It's not fake. It's real. It happened to you. Mine, same thing. Everybody else's, same thing. It's by comparing and contrasting that we can get further and learn something. The next filter is tactical and strategic. Now, same thing, the football player versus the wrestler MMA guy. Kevin said, there's always someone out there that can kick your butt. Bigger or smaller, it doesn't matter. They didn't expect it, but sure got it. So this kind of blends the emotional one as well. He talks about strategy. Well, yeah, don't pick a fight with everybody who's out there, because eventually you're going to run into somebody who can kick your ass. And it doesn't matter if he's bigger or smaller than you. It's that eventually you will find somebody who can take you on. So it's a bad strategy to pick fights with people and see how far you can get with that. And then it gets a little bit emotional in the end when he says, they didn't expect it, but they sure got it. So nothing wrong with that. Again, it's a great filter, because you look at the how and the why of what's going on. So you learn how to analyze on a tactical and on a strategic level, like, okay, were these choices good choices? Or what these people did instinctively, were that good choices? Did they advance them in their tactical and strategic goals? Or did they take them further away from those? Did it help or did it harm? So when you purely look at the tactics involved, like what did they do and why and what was the result, then you can learn. For instance, in this example, they were in a bar, the football player and the wrestler and their friends, and there were a fair amount of people involved. It was a relatively crowded bar. So running around and trying to do, long distance sidekicks, that would have probably been a bad tactic, because you don't have the space. Now, from my point of view, it wasn't a great strategy to take the fight to the ground right away either, because it only takes one asshole standing by to decide that he's gonna soccer kick your head into next week because he recognizes the player and is a big fan, for instance. It only takes one guy and you're out. And so, was going to the ground the best strategy? I don't think so. So we can talk about that, and that is, again, a very, very different filter from the emotional one or from the personal one. Like, well, every single fight that I ever did, we went to the ground and nothing ever happened. Nobody ever hurt me and nobody ever kicked me in the face, right? And that is true for you, but I can show you many videos of instances where the opposite is the case. The most famous one being that kid who is fighting in the street and, he's getting ground and pounded, and his mom walks up to the guy beating up her son and she just soccer kicks him in the face and the guy's knocked out. That is an old video. You can find it online very easily. But the point is that when we talk tactics and strategy, it becomes a very different discussion as well. And I recently posted a video of a woman who had psychological issues. She was armed, and the police were trying to talk her down. They're doing her best, and it looked like they might have succeeded in talking her down and bringing her in safely. When the mom comes rolling up and starts yelling and just basically escalating the situation. And I'm going to quote Steve again. Sorry, Steve, but I know you're a police officer, so that's why I'm picking you. He said, "This is why police hostage negotiations never ever introduce family members or friends into the hostage negotiations." And that's a great example from, again, this kind of blends the personal aspect, so personal experience, with also tactics and strategy. Why would you do that? Well, there's a good reason why we don't do that exactly. Why we don't bring a family member in this situation, because the potential for escalation is very, very high. And when we talk about strategy and tactics, then it's interesting to hear from people who do this for a living, because that way we get to learn a little bit more about the ways that they do things for their environment. Doesn't mean everything will apply to you. For instance, a law enforcement officer is not a soldier, is not a bouncer, is not a civilian. There's different rules that apply. There's different rules of engagement. There's different legal aspects and so on. And the result of that is that you can't just assume that because it applies for a police officer, you can do the same thing. You don't have the same authority. It doesn't work that way. But the discussion is worthwhile, and then see what you can take away from their experiences on the tactical and strategic level. So, and that brings me to the next to last filter, and that is the legal one. And again, we're talking about the football player and the wrestler. And in my analysis, this is what I wrote. I wrote, what happened beforehand? The video doesn't tell that. Are they justified? Their lawyer claims they are, because I looked it up. And Brown is, he says, not so much. Who is right? None of us know. Hence the point of a police investigation. This is one of the points that I often bring up, is that a video doesn't give you every single detail. The vast majority of the videos that you see when it comes to violence do not show what happened before the incident really kicks off. So you don't have the full context. And it often also doesn't show how it ends. It only shows one camera angle, and you might completely miss something else. If the guy's pulling a knife and it is not in view of the camera, you won't necessarily see it. So you might think that, well, he's just punching him, but actually he's stabbing the guy. So looking at a police investigation that way might be more helpful. And that is a legal standard also, is that you are assumed to be innocent until proven guilty. So how can we prove that you're guilty? Well, we have to investigate first. And if you're thinking purely from an emotional filter, you might be screaming like, police brutality. And I'm like, hold on, let's look first. Or if you disagree with that, then my standard response is, okay, so then we are getting rid of the standard of innocent until proven guilty. And then it also needs to apply to you. It applies to everybody, or it doesn't apply to anybody at all. Otherwise, it's not a standard. Now, I continue to talk here about the legal issue, and in that same video I said Jones's friend pushes Brown. Brown is not looking at him at this point. Big mistake in an escalating conflict. A little bit of a technical comment. And it seems as if he thinks Jones pushed him, but it's his friend who actually does. And then he decides to start swinging. So if you pause right here, were there other options? Was retreat possible? Was his response, throwing hard punches, takedown, rear naked choke, and then ground and pound, so hard that Jones's eye socket broke? Was that proportionate? The courts will decide on that, but I don't think it looks good. So here, I am just talking about the legal aspects. What happened, and how will the legal system look at it when there is either a civil suit or when the DA decides to prosecute. At that point, it doesn't matter what we think anymore. The only thing that really matters is what the legal system will consider, what the law says, and so on. Imagine watching somebody get beat up in a video. And he gets beat up bad, and people are outraged by that. And then I start talking about the legal issues there, and then they're like, well, why are you talking about that? This is just horrible. Yes, I know it's horrible, but that's not the point any longer. We can agree that it's horrible and still look at the other factors. And that is, again, I'll get back to it soon. That's kind of the point of this episode. But I need to cover one more filter, and that's the moral one. Now, on the same incident, David said, Jones and his buddy, Pusher, need to pay damages. Jones was wrong. How did the bloody nose happen? How doesn't matter anymore. Jones, you are wrong. Your buddy that pushed and was in the process of taking a free shot got exactly what he needed. You hit anyone and you take your chances. Fool Jones. You are only bigger on the football field. You order someone else to leave after blooding his on her or her nose, and you better be able to back it up with something more than some boy pushing from behind. Jones, you are sad. The real world isn't going to just take your abusive conditions, Jones. You walk very quietly if you are smart. You don't bloody anyone's nose and stand there ordering another one to leave. So there is a moral condemnation from David. He says like, Jones, you are wrong, and this is why you are wrong. Now this has obviously an emotional component to it, but it brings forward the larger discussion of morality. Like, is this right or is this wrong, and why? Now that is to me always also a fascinating filter, because we get to see what people actually think, how they view others. And by default, we also then have to take a closer look at how we view others if we agree or disagree with the comment from a moral standpoint. And it gets murky very quickly. You can get to some really difficult discussions like what is right and wrong once you look at all the other filters that I mentioned before. Because you can say like, he was wrong to do that, but that doesn't mean that the legal system will agree with you. That doesn't mean that the law is on your side. We can morally state that we think something was right or wrong, but that doesn't mean that you will, if you do the same thing, that you will be found not guilty of whatever you are charged with if the other guy decides to press charges, or again, the DA says that he's going to prosecute. So the moral question is valid and is perhaps one of the most important filters, at the very least to look back at your own position on it. But at the same time, it is one that very easily allows you to justify in your own mind certain actions, and that eventually you end up in real trouble. And I'll put a link in the show notes to a Patreon post that I did about just that scenario, in which somebody ended up using his firearm in what they claimed was self-defense, and they thought they were justified, and it turns out that they were not, and lots of problems followed. So those are all the categories, the filters, if you will, that I wanted to mention. So there's emotional, technical, personal, tactical, strategic, legal, and moral. So whenever you're looking at a violent situation, maybe give these filters a try, and then see how each different one changes your opinion by adding elements that you didn't consider before. And that way you learn more, and you can consider how you should personally react in a similar situation. Now, one of the biggest problems in our society today is it's twofold. It's too many people, they want simple answers to complex problems, and it just doesn't work. The world is very complex. And as a second part of that problem is that they refuse to look at all the factors involved in an issue. They only want to discuss the ones that support their agenda, their ideology, or their cause. And it doesn't matter who does it, left, right, center, pro this, against that. Doesn't matter who does it. It's this tribal mentality of any information that doesn't confirm what I already think and want is invalid. And even if it's valid, I don't want to talk about it. Well, yeah, nothing works that way. Because reality doesn't bend to your opinions. It is what it is. And you disagreeing that this shouldn't be important, but it is anyway, it doesn't change reality either. Especially when it comes to violence. You might think that certain things are stupid or shouldn't exist, but that doesn't make them go away. Still happens. So with that in mind, give the filters a try. And most of all, when you try that, so use all these filters and look at a video of an incident from scratch, always with the different filters in mind, and see how hard it can be, especially if you react emotionally at first. See how hard it can be to switch filters and be open to information that is from a different point of view. But I firmly believe that it's worth the effort. Because if anything, when it comes to violence, this is how you learn without making the mistakes you see others make in those videos, sometimes costing them their lives. All right, guys, that's it. I'm going to wrap it up here. Went a little bit further than I had originally planned. So we're going to wrap it up here, and I would only ask you to, again, hit the like button, share, subscribe, leave me a review. That would also be great. Go to wimsblog.com/60, and that's where you will find all the different links to the things that I mentioned here. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm going to leave it at that. Okay, guys, talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.